Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Vantassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Vantassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing you yet another episode of Living the Wildlife. Hey, took a couple of weeks off from talking about tree squirrels, so I promised that I would talk about the control of tree squirrels, because I already talked about some of their biology to get you up to speed on that, just sort of refresh your memory. Most of you are already quite familiar with tree squirrels, just a little refresher. So I wanted to talk a little bit about control techniques. So I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things, particularly for those of you who are looking to get into some wildlife control, maybe to expand your business out, particularly during the slower months that may occur in the winter, although I'm told, that some guys, there is no slow month. It's just a matter of, there's chaos and then managed chaos. So, but anyways, if you're not one of those and you're looking to do a little work on wildlife control and you haven't maybe purchased any products, let's talk about some of those. So I'm going to refer primarily to using baited sets to control tree squirrels, because most people, when they're starting off in the business, that's how they begin. They begin with a baited set. Nothing wrong with that. I think that with the technology we have today, you can certainly move faster to positive sets. So for those of you who aren't familiar again with those types of sets, I did a podcast earlier on this, but let's just sort of highlight what those three sets are. So you have a baited set. That's your typical cage trap or box trap with bait that lures the animal into the location. So that's your baited set. Then you have what's called a blind set. A blind set is where you are placing the trap along a trail or directly in front of the hole, so that whatever moves in or out of that location is going to get caught. Sort of like a two-door trap. So you place it on the trail. There's no bait whatsoever. The animal's just simply moseying along in its normal business. Wham, it gets caught. And then the third type of set, which in my opinion is really the holy grail of wildlife control, and that is a positive set. Now, you can't always use it, so I need to be careful of what I say here. But a positive set is you are placing a device over the hole opening, and the only animal you're catching is what's coming out of the hole. Where a blind set, you could catch an animal coming in or going out. With a positive set, you're only catching, I don't like using this language all the time, but it gets the point across, the guilty animal, the animal that is simply involved in living in that house or living in that den. That would be a positive set. One way to remember it is you're positively certain you caught the guilty animal. Because in fairness, that is a concern when you're dealing with clients, especially if you're charging by the visit or you're charging by the animal, that if you're putting baited traps up there or even blind sets, although blind sets are a little less attractive, sometimes squirrels will travel a little ways to get to that, particularly during mating season. So if you've got a pregnant, an estrus female and she's ready to mate, man, those males are going to come from all over the place. So you could be racking up quite a bill for people. But again, I kind of digress here. So those are your three sets: baited, blind set, positive set. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what type of equipment do you want to have when you're trapping squirrels. So the first rule about trapping is traps are like money, right? So more is better. So you don't want to be trapping squirrels and just setting a trap. I mean, the question I sometimes ask people is I say, look, do you hunt with a bullet? And they generally, they look at you and they clearly mean no, right? I'm a little more snarky with people because I don't have to make a living doing this. I'm not recommending myself as a great salesperson. I'm not. Okay, there are people a lot better than me, I can assure you. But sometimes I want you to sort of understand that these are the types of some of the questions you're going to get. And it's just, some of it's just silly. So you want to be sure that you're capturing the guilty source. So remember, traps are like money. If you're not setting 3 traps at a site, you're kind of wasting your time a little bit, right? Because the whole point of trapping is you're trying to get the job done, right? Trapping is time intensive. It's not like toxicants where you just simply lay out the toxicants, you're done. We'll see you next week, man, or next month. With trapping, you got to be there every day, or someone's got to be checking it every day. And if your client's not checking it, you'd better be there checking it because it's a humane issue, right? So, and I don't want to digress down the road. So you need to be looking at 3 traps. The problem is trapping is equipment intensive. It takes up a lot of room in your truck. And so when I first started back in the day, I was using traps that were 7x7 by 24. And that's the kind of trap I thought I needed to use because I just thought, man, these squirrels are so long. I got to be sure they're inside the cage. I don't want the door hitting them on the back of the butt. And then they're squeezing back out. And now I have an educated squirrel. And then things really get bad. Well, little did I know. And so I want you to learn from my ignorance at this point so you don't make my mistakes. And this is part of the evolution of our industry. You don't need a trap that big. Now, certainly, if you're beginning in the industry and you want to try to say, what is the go-to trap to cover a lot of different animals, you can certainly get a 7x7 by 24 trap. And that will allow you to catch skunks as well as tree squirrels such as fox squirrels and gray squirrels. You can certainly do that. So the traps I was using was 1x1 inch mesh. We've talked about that in earlier podcasts. You probably want to get to a 1/2x1. But again, I started out early, but I was still having these long traps. And what happened was, as my business grew, it's like these traps are taking so much space in my truck. Because if you're doing 10 jobs, let's say you're doing 10 different clients, well, that's 30 traps. For squirrels, right? That takes up a lot of room. Just do the math, right? I mean, 7x7 inches times 10 is 70 inches, right? So you can try to put them side by side or stack them, whatever the case may be. Sooner or later, this takes up a lot of cubic feet in your truck. Well, let me tell you how to resolve some of that. And this is the beauty of how the technology has changed. Our understanding of squirrel trapping has changed. And that is, you can use, a guy turned me on to this. I'm not exactly sure who. It might have been Don LaFountain out of Massachusetts, I think, but don't quote me on that. But he may have been the one who did it for me. And that is, you can get a Safeguard 5x5 by 18. A beautiful, cute little trap, particularly when you're looking at using the skunk trap, the 7x7 by 24. Now you're down to a 5x5. And you're looking at this thing and I'm like, really? This is going to catch a gray squirrel? And the answer is, oh yeah, it's going to catch a gray squirrel. You can fit 3 or 4 of these traps almost in the same amount of space as that would be consumed by your 7x7 by 24. Not quite, but you will feel the difference in your truck, right? So now you can pile in more traps, plus more traps in your vehicle and plus you have a lower cost, right? These traps are going to cost you a little bit less than the larger trap. So I mentioned a brand name there, just in truth in advertising. I'm not making any money off of Safeguard, so don't think I'm, pushing them. Tomahawk has a trap, a similar size. The point is, the key there is not so much the brand as it is the 5x5 by 18 inch trap. And so you want to make sure you're focusing on those that have the 1/2 by 1 inch mesh. because you don't want to be having a squirrel reaching in with that 5 inches, right? A squirrel can reach through a larger cage mesh, and all of a sudden he's grabbing your bait and leaving, and you're like, hey, what happened here, right? So I love that particular trap. Make sure they're stable, set them up. You could put several of those near one another, and bang, you're good to go to catching your squirrel. How do you bait it? Well, I would just simply take the paste bait and smear it right on the treadle. Now, if you're using seeds, I'm always nervous when I hear about wildlife control operators using seeds, because seeds are extraordinarily attractive to birds. And so you don't want to run the risk of violating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Okay. So be careful out there. So I would say if you're going to be using seeds, and seeds are really attractive to gray squirrels, fox squirrels, black sunflower seeds are just awesome. Is if you're using some of that along whatever you're pasting onto the treadle, make sure you're covering that trap so it's not visible, particularly from above. So if you're putting that trap up on a roof, along a gutter line, you want to make sure that that's sort of covered so that bait can be seen by a squirrel that's cruising by, but not by a bird flying overhead or flying by and all of a sudden sees those black sunflower seeds and has to go check it out. Okay. So that is something you want to be very careful whenever you're trapping. So I talked about the 5x5x18. There is another trap. This one's produced by Wildlife Control Supplies. Again, Truth in Advertising. They do sell some of my books, but I don't get any money off their selling the type of equipment. Same way with Tomahawk. They sell one of my books. So I'm not getting any commission off this, just to be clear with everybody. All right. So, I don't think there's a lot of different traps, but the key here is the size. And so I am not aware of other places that are selling. This is called the Wildlife Control Supplies Shorty, and that's a 5x5x10. Now think about that for me. We went from 24 inches, now we're down to 18 inches in length, and now we're down to 10 inches in length. Now, I've never used this trap personally. That's a really short trap, but the 5x5x10. But he built it because he had a lot of wildlife control operators who were having to get traps inside of stoves and fireplaces because in the wintertime, males are hunting for females and they keep falling down chimneys because people don't cap their chimneys. So they wanted a way to get a trap that was small enough that would fit into the firebox of some of these stoves, or they would get up above the smoke shelf and get inside the chimney that way. And he had this built, a 5x5x10. He called it the Shorty, so that people could set the trap above in the smoke shelf or put it inside the wood stove and then close it up and not worry about the sooted squirrel running around the white living room. You know how that always happens. Whenever you're dealing with a squirrel, it's all sooty. It's going to be running around in a white room. Always prepare for Murphy's Law here, folks. Okay. But people have loved this trap. He had, I think it was off market for a while, and now it looks like he's brought it back. The 5x5x10. This is all in inches, by the way. So you have some options there. He also has another trap that's designed for placement inside gutters. It's called like a simple trap. And so there's 3 different sizes, but it's something that would just simply set directly inside of a gutter because it's that narrow. And yeah, squirrels will go in that. I haven't used that. Some of this equipment's come out after I've left some of that field work. So, it's something for you to think about. So if you were asking my advice to Stephen, what should I start with? My advice to you would be to start with the 5x5x18 as your go-to trap. The beauty of that particular trap, particularly if you get the ones that are 1/2 inch by 1 inch mesh, is you can catch red squirrels in them, you can catch gray squirrels in them, and you can even catch chipmunks in them. So it can be a multi-use device. And that can be helpful for you. And so the price is right with them. Get yourself a dozen or so of traps. Don't go, understand, Nucoa It does have an arrangement with Wildlife Control Supplies for a discount. Wildlife Control Supplies gives you a discount commission later on. So sometimes people get a check if you buy enough. I think it's 5%. You have to be a member NUCO to get it. That's just something out there. So again, truth in advertising. I am a board member of the National Wildlife Control Operators Association. So, hey, I'm a believer of the association. Whether you join or not is completely up to you. I don't know if the NPMA has any type of arrangements with various trap vendors. I can't speak to that. I am a member, but I'm kind of a quasi-government member, so I'm not a full member of the NPMA. I'm one of those government members because I work for a government agency in the country. So that is another trap for you. But let me tell you about one more. He says, Stephen, hey, I want a kill trap. I don't want to have a trap where I have to kill the animal. I want the trap to do it for me. Well, let me tell you about another trap. I love this trap. Fortunately, I lived in the state of Massachusetts, and they banned it because that's what liberal states do, right? They have a piece of equipment, and if it works, we got to ban it because it's an unfair advantage. I know that's my political statement for today, okay? But this is called the Wildlife Control Supplies Tube Trap. Awesome trap on gray and fox squirrels. Let me give you the dimensions of it. It's a 4.5-inch diameter tube that's 15 inches long and has a striker bar inside. So when the squirrel enters the trap, again, it would be, the squirrel can see through it. There's a trigger on the middle of the trap. If he steps on that trigger and fires it, a very powerful, I want to warn you folks, respect this trap. That spring is strong. I can tell you it. If you're not paying attention, you can hurt yourself and hurt yourself severely with it. So be careful. And that striker bar then pushes the body of the squirrel up against the internal side of that tube, basically crushing it. The spring is powerful enough that it actually passed Canadian humane lethal trap standards as well as those in the UK, which is impressive. Now you may say, well, what do I care about that? You know, guys, I think it matters, right? What it does is it tells you that the trap has met a criteria for how quickly the animal dies and how consistently the animal dies. So our conibear style traps or body gripping traps, are they perfect? The answer is no. Sometimes you do get a bad hit, right? You get what's called a hip catch, where the squirrel will be alive when you arrive. And so I just want to tell you the truth here. This is the reality of it. So if you're telling your client, oh, don't worry about it, the squirrel will be dead, it won't be blah, blah, blah. Well, the answer is, majority of the time, that's exactly the right. The squirrel will be dead relatively quickly. Not instantly, but relatively quickly. And so most of the time, the squirrel will be dead when you arrive. But there will be exceptions to that, and you need to be aware of that, right? So you need to be prepared to have either a bucket of water handy or a gas chamber to finish that squirrel off, because you want to be respectful and realize that, hey, yeah, the squirrel was a pest. It was bothering people. We needed to remove it, but we still need to respect it. It's still a creature that deserves our respect. We need to kill it responsibly, right? So what I'm saying is with this trap is that when it hits and it strikes well, it will kill the squirrel relatively quickly. And typically the standards are that the squirrel goes into unconsciousness, I believe, within 3 minutes. You may say, wow, 3 minutes, Steve, that's a long time. Hey, some traps don't even make that limit, right? So it's not euthanasia. Those of you who want to go back and listen to an earlier podcast about talking about the difference between humane dispatch and euthanasia. This is why these concepts matter, folks, okay? I know that some people's eyes were probably glazing over when I was talking about it before, but these concepts matter, all right? Which is why I pound the table so hard about them. We need to use correct language. But when we have humane dispatch, the animal still suffers. Yeah, it still experiences pain, it still experiences suffering, but it dies quickly. Let me give you a counterexample. And again, I'm not bashing conibear traps. I like conibear traps. But when the researchers did work with conibear style traps on raccoons. None of them, let me repeat that, not one met the humane standard of, and I think they went out to over 3 minutes per raccoon to unconsciousness. None of them met the standard. So when a trap does meet this what does meet the standard for a particular animal, that's awesome. And we need to embrace that, and we need to encourage trap manufacturers, because it's expensive, folks, all right? This costs money, right? It costs time, it costs money, it's design issues, but not every trap has been put through the rigors of this. And we want to encourage this. We want to improve our industry, not just simply get into an attitude that says, what do I care about the squirrel, whether it's suffering? I don't want to be spending $1 million to stop the squirrel suffering. But if I have to spend, an extra nickel to reduce that squirrel suffering and all the other squirrels I'm going to be trapping, is that really a big deal? Is that worth it? I think it's worth it, right? So I think there's a balance between those people who just don't care about animals at all. They don't care if they're suffering at all. And they really kind of, they go home and kick the dog and kick the kids, and it doesn't matter what, whether someone suffers, it's their will. And then the other extreme is, every animal, if it suffers at all, that we can't do it, and they just want to ban everything. And I'm like, no. There needs to be a recognition. It's an animal. It's not a human. But if we can do something to reduce the suffering of that animal, or kill it more quickly, kill it more responsibly, then that's a good thing, and we need to embrace that. That's my point. The tube trap has met that. So let's talk about the use of the tube trap. When I used it in the field, I typically baited the trap. So you can take a bungee cord and hook it, put it on the gutter, hook it in between the gutter spike. So you'd put one hook on one gutter spike, put that cord through the trap, hook it onto another gutter spike. And then I would take a cloth or some hardware cloth, wrap it around the trigger, then smear all that with some peanut butter. Some wildlife control operators would smear the bait on the inside top of the circular trap, of the tube trap. And the idea is when the squirrel would stop, stand there, reach up, grab the bait on the ceiling, and then when he put his feet down, would hit the trigger, causing the trap to fire. Whichever way you want to do it, experiment, find out what works for you. You'll find that the trap works really well. Do people use it as a blind set? And the answer is yes. I tended not to go that direction, but there have been people in the industry who have been successful using it. What they found, however, is that the opening for the squirrel to run through was a little bit too large. Particularly, they would jump over the trigger. So what they would do is they would take a little block of wood and secure it to the ceiling of the trap above the trigger to sort of slow that squirrel down, to get that squirrel to put his feet on the trigger. When you purchase one, it'll make sense when you see that. And they would be successful catching that. Now, what happens when the squirrel is caught and there's a good hit? All you're seeing is maybe about 3 inches of tail out the end of the trap. Now, if that's a problem for your clients, if you want that trap to be completely sort of hidden from the public, that what it's doing, simply extend those tubes out several inches so that if a squirrel is caught, the tail won't show to the street. And what you'll be looking for is whether the bar is horizontal to the ground or whether it's vertical to the ground at a 90-degree angle. And that'll tell you whether it fired or not. Now, there's going to be some holes drilled through the ends of the trap. And you're like, what are those holes for? Well, those holes are for screws that allow you to screw the trap to walls, make it vertical. Like I've been talking about using the trap at a horizontal place, but you can, like on a surface of a gutter, but you can actually screw them to walls. So let's say you have squirrels climbing the side of a building. Well, you can just simply screw the trap in parallel to that corner and hope that the squirrel just climbs through the trap. Some people take 2 screws and they will put it so that they will still let the squirrel climb the wall, but they will have the trap horizontal. And if you put 2 screws in the end, you can actually hold the trap horizontal from one end because it's stiff, right? It's made out of metal. Now there is a non-rusting version of the trap in the sense that it's made out of it's kind of it's like a plastic. I'd never used one of those, but it is cool, particularly when you think about living in cold weather and you're touching a cold metal trap. But I would just get the metal ones. There are some that are now powder coated, so there's some options there. I would just simply, buy them and then paint them. So I would paint them either black or some sort of a dark brown so that they're more rust resistant, but also less visible to the public. And if you want a client to be able to check your trap, simply take some fluorescent orange ribbon and attach it to the striker bar and tell them, look, when it's here, don't call me and tell me it's not sprung. When it's here, when it's vertical, then know that the trap has been fired. So the beauty of that particular trap is the squirrel will typically be dead when you arrive. And again, it has met various humane lethal trap standards, both in Canada and in the UK. We don't have those standards in the United States. I would love to see some standards. I would love to see the industry begin to adopt some of those standards that have been used in other countries, just to so that we can see the technology improve, because I do think we're at a point where we can use better kill traps that have a more effective role in killing quickly for humane dispatch. So those are your options. Let's talk about bait briefly. Peanut butter, of course, is a go-to bait. You can always consider mixing peanut butter in with some molasses. You can think about mixing it in with some oats. You can mix it in with some oil sunflower seeds or some other type of bird seed. Just always be cognizant when you're using some of those seed elements to it, that the danger of catching birds, and you want to be very careful of that. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating again. Hey guys, don't pull out the Skippy jar in front of your clients. Please don't do that. Why? Because it diminishes the value of what you're bringing to the table. You're saying, well, Stephen, I'm lying to the client. No, you're not lying to the client. You're lying to the client if you tell them it's not peanut butter. When a client asks you what's in there, you don't necessarily have to tell them. You can ask your client, if necessary, if there's peanut butter allergies. Some people are highly allergic to peanut butter. But again, you're not using it inside the house, so you need to decide about how you're going to move forward with that. Peanut butter is not the only bait available. But imagine how you would feel when, the analogy I use is when an electrician that you hire, the electrician, I'm having trouble with my light and it doesn't seem to be working, and your electrician comes out, bends over, and he plugs the light in and turns it on and then says, yeah, $85, please. How would you feel? You may say, well, he's a professional and I made a mistake. Yes, it's the same way. When you pull out that Skippy jar, you're telling the client, yeah, they could have done this themselves, you idiot. It's just not respectful. And the reality is there's more to it than just simply pulling out a Skippy jar. There's trap placement. There is the equipment. It's the proficiency of doing the work. It's the ladder work that you're being for. Wildlife control is not rocket science, but there is a skill. There is a discipline to it, and something that a lot of people don't want to do for a variety of reasons. So don't insult your clients. So what do? You can put some green, food coloring into the bait to kind of mix it up. If you're using molasses in with your bait, that will certainly change the color and texture. Let the customer guess. Who cares? There's also a variety of other professional baits on the market that you can certainly use. It'll give you a chance to change things up a little bit. for your work. And you need to have a few baits. You don't have to have 50 baits. Sometimes it can be a little crazy, like people fishing, right? They have to have 50 lures to catch the bass. And so it can kind of get that way. You don't really need to do it. You should need to be having a few options of working forward with that. Sometimes, and then when you're using blind sets, remember you're not using bait at all, right? So I hope you'll find this helpful with those particular traps. Let's run down through them quite quickly. We talked about the tube trap from Wildlife Control Supplies. We talked about the 7x7x24 trap, which is really for skunks, but you can catch gray squirrels and fox squirrels with it. But I certainly would recommend, if you're starting off in the business or wanting to find a trap that will reduce the space requirements, I like the 18 5x5. And some people have been using other traps that are 5x5x10, the Wildlife Control Supplies Shorty. And there's certainly, you might want to play a little bit, but I think you'll be very happy with the 18 5x5. I certainly was when someone turned me onto it. And of course, I love the tube trap because it killed the squirrel for me until the state that I lived in banned that piece of equipment. Hopefully, you'll be organized with other wildlife control operators in your state, and you won't let that happen to you. Are you organized? That's a topic for another podcast. Hope you found this helpful. We'll talk maybe some more about some other techniques for controlling tree squirrels. I'm Stephen Vantassel for Wildlife Control Consultant. Hey, love to hear from you about what some ideas that you want me to talk about. I'm still working a little bit on tree squirrels, but I haven't heard anything else in a while. So otherwise, I'll talk about what I want to talk about. That may not be what you want to hear. Love to hear what you're looking for. Do meet us up on Facebook. And again, thanks for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.